Good morning, Gen Rinpoche, Tashi Delay. And good morning, Katrina. Thank you for interpreting for us this morning. And welcome to all our online participants. We'll begin with some prayers, and you'll find the link to those prayers in the chat box. To the teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one that's gone, the foe destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one gone to bliss, nor the world supreme guide to being to be tamed. Teacher of gods and humans to you, the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I trust you to make offerings and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you are born on this earth, you faced them rise and said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then I bow. With your body's form supremely fine, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain. Fame that blazes in the three worlds, winner the best, supreme guide, to you I bow. With the supreme sign, face like a spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the three worlds are not incomparable, wise one, to you I bow. Great compassionate protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, to the Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms. Unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path to freedom too, well established in the trainings. The holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop into a bubble. A dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all seeing to beautiful false, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, foreland sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you, may all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Guru Mandala I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Do you remember?
110.
This oh yeah. Oh yeah, do it. No savalemes. Do it. Yes. Alle. Oh yeah. Oh, Sanje chum dende. Tebe some because some good. No, Tebachi education. Tebe chunam shiver in use. Tebachi valitan any chukanga. Shingirwa, Teba Majini Shingmardo. Tebe Digland Dobarchi, Tebatan Maimba, Sosoge, Yamlicha Vinani, Tiba Miguel to the Park, what to Tugiro. Tebe Digland Dobarchi. Tebe Tema Imba Pans, that Tema Imba, Merunga Samatam Jitini, Pungit Esponge Resora, Taradendra Combalatene, Yandi and Combalatene, Yangelin Debatoa Sigre Sungudua, Tienduko, Teba Sanjay Chui Nedra, Landurgine. Dembe shooters of Tambo so to education, but es Matana ni Shingmardo, and Machina ni Landorche to Yungmardo. Turn the Landorche by Latani Rimbi, and in young Ellen Davate, Dunge, Nesonga Tungelen Dava, Koya Tungelen Dava la Soba, young Eddie Tungele also, David Tarvala Soba to stop to the Esonguda. Ah, oh, teaches.
So here, to begin with, from a collection of sayings by the Buddha, the Bhagavan, emphasizing the importance of hearing, of learning by hearing, it says that by hearing one knows the Dharma. So it isn't impossible to know unless one actually hears the teachings. And based upon that, we don't just gain knowledge, but we can avert from, turn away from that which is non-virtuous. By knowing what is virtuous and non-virtuous, one can get rid of that which is non-virtuous. And by hearing, one is able to abandon that which is meaningless or everything that is unsuitable. By knowing what is right and wrong, one can thereby get rid of that which is not suitable or not right. And by hearing, one is ultimately able to attain nirvana by improving, by developing that knowledge that one gains, by understanding the points of what is to be adopted and what is to be abandoned. That is the way that one can, in sequence, attain these kinds of attainments. If you don't hear, if you don't learn about these things, then it's impossible to progress in this way. It is based upon our hearing, our knowledge, that we can improve in stages and slowly, sequentially, be able to pass beyond the suffering of the lower realms, be able to pass beyond the suffering of samsara and so forth. So here, it's incredibly important to learn, to hear.
Oh yeah. Oh, that when I sit in the young Sanjay, the needle Songudua Kasore. Oh, Kasore. Tebe Somsura, Tebe Somle, Sanjay Songudua, Tebe Somlera. Tebe Majena, Nation Tugumare Songudua, Pechan Songudua. Chida Kimni Levio Besse, Kim de Toga Kangba, Toga Yabuche, Yoshe, and Nahu Chagua. Chida Kimni Levio Be. Mimbe kebe nangshu pe nagu nalol mimbe ya kenge nalol ya chimbe ina sura mi yongen lo du yongen mi te ti kangbe nalo chimbe ina sura mimbe kebe nangshu nas suna yeba jojane minden shindu meton ase suda chala mambu yorde te soso tonya ke tachi ke shirab yorde tanda tungu mare sungora ti meton ade karchen tungu mare sudo he mesan ti tungu mardo Chezanko Tina Shinsugo. Maybe Kebe Nanshuna, Ra Sunam Yoga Georgiani, Mig Dancing do Metoas. So Tajik Mig Yore, Shirab Yorete, Tanda Tongumare Sungora, Mig Dancing do Metoas. O Tagana Shinsungora Tipechane, the Shin dina Riki Besse, Deshindo, Rigi Busa Nashirwa, Chegi, Gawadan Denge, Tarwa Tobe Gawadan Denge. Tarwa tobe rigi kawatan denge, Sanje yukoban tobe rigi kawatan denge, rigi bu sungudu anga namje. Tishin dina rigi be mini loto denge jurjas, ko loto shenye, taba chigani shenye niba yore, shiro ywa. Tishin dina rigi be mini sigwara mido, mini loto denge jurjas, shiche ne tutu shenye ke, Lotu dan niba yuwa resa, lotu shirab dan denpa resa wara. And causal, Lodun Danjuya. Tigbatan and Kivish, Matupato Shimanduse. Colodri Eva in a Tambuchi, Turnamato, Taz, Rangshin, Yongumardo. When you care about that, as we share song to Tersonane, Sosolodri, and Shetuwoodno. Not under the Geneco, Passion, and Shentuegi, Niva Yomardo, Lodun Dengimardo. Lodun Danjur Jansus in Casara. This Tigbatan and Kivish, Matupato Shimandusera. The Tabacation Boris, Taba determination is Songara. Naguna Drona Chalamabuyana Tabayana, and the Society of Yoreti, did some tonto Gurese. Tabe Tremede man, a tonto Gumare Songorno. Did get and take which you might about the shame in yours? Oh, Jenny. Mingde Mame, you by Tiba the Chilamna Tango.
No. So,
Yeah.
no. Here again, quoting from the teachings of the Buddha, this compendium of sayings, without hearing, if we don't hear the Dharma, then we're unable to sort of know virtue from non-virtue, for example. So here it gives this example of like if you have a house, all of this, the roof is sort of covered over such that the inside of the house is completely dark. There's no light inside. And so although there might be all kinds of various things inside of this house, because it is enveloped in darkness. So this verse continues talking about giving this example that like a person in a house that is completely enveloped in darkness, even if there are forms inside, so things, all kinds of things inside of this house, and even if it is sort of a child of the lineage, we often hear this in sutras and so forth, someone who has the fortune, has the ability to be able to, say, attain liberation, has the ability to be able to attain Buddhahood. If it is someone who has that kind of fortune, has this sort of a good lineage as well, it continues, is intelligent. So this person, it's not that they don't have the ability to, say, distinguish right from wrong, virtue from non-virtue, but they haven't been instructed. So if this person who is a child of the lineage, who is intelligent, but until they hear about the Dharma of virtue and non-virtue, they're not able to know it. So it's like a person who, although they are sighted, walks into a completely dark house and is unable to distinguish any sort of forms without hearing about these things. Although one has that kind of potential to be able to understand what one should and shouldn't do, unless you have gained that kind of knowledge, it's like being a sighted person in a dark space without any kind of a lamp to illuminate everything. If you had a lamp, you would be able to see whatever it is that is in that dark room.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, Mishimajara, Tapechara, Mingde Mame Yoba Yeseta, Mitan Dembachara, Tayag Shirab Yobache, Marmich Seji Shirala Yobayena, Seji Mame Chirag Tremichi, Kilawa Kiji, Yamto Yobayena Sigurdo. Oh, Kishi Garsura, Mingde Mame Yobaye, and Garsura. Migdan Dembashara, Manmi Yobashe, Seji Manmi Yobashe. Mingde Mami Yoba Yese, Sunam Tonga Chidani, Nagun Kamba Nagudin and Dronaya, Kari Yobachala Samaton to Gurachera, Sunam Tonga Chidawa. Tishin Keda Tigbeche, Tebe number Shebanjus, oh, Denashi, Lanja Kari Cheku, Dorja Kari, Susu Cindy, Lanja, Devarchebe, Lanja Kari, Dorja Kari, Dekiwachima Pengele. Pege, Lanja the Torja Karim Bati, or Tebachana and Shingri Sungora, Ran Mami Yavana Shere, Tebe Tremisiga, Tebatimu Missu Tremi in Shera, or Tinduko Tremination, or Tebe Tremi the Ranga Yona, Ran Shirab Tavi Shirab the Yavra, and the Kangaton to Gurese, Kambanagunan Drongedi, Mami Yona Kangaton to Gurasera. Mami Mana so Migdan Dembe Shirab. I never you and Ayako can Teba shit took your mat no matter or Tinashin or Teba determination chair or Tinnigasra. Mean this get anti-gracious Teba number 7 use. Now what is Lamaya?
No. So here, putting forth this kind of example again of someone who's like in a dark house and has the sort of sight to be able to see, but is without a lamp. Here it continues saying someone who is sighted and who has a butter lamp, like how they would be able to see forms within that kind of a dark house. Likewise, it is from hearing, from learning, that we can distinguish and know virtue from non-virtue. So here, when you have someone who is sighted, who has that kind of ability and intelligence, and is also carrying a lamp in their hand when they go into, say, a dark space, that illuminates everything that is around them. And so too, when we have the kind of wisdom that knows what it is, we have the learning that knows what it is we should take up into practice, what it is that should be avoided, what it is that we should be doing if we want to gain a good result in the future, and so forth. It is based upon that kind of knowledge of what is to be practiced and what is to be abandoned, that is like a lamp that illuminates everything around us. So while one might have the kind of potential in terms of one's own intelligence, if you are lacking that lamp of learning, of hearing, without that kind of condition, one is unable to really distinguish all of those things. So this here emphasizes the importance of having learning, of having hearing, by likening it to someone who is sighted but also has that lamp.
Oh yeah. This on the go Tebe Chigini, Langdor, you net to the shit of Grace or Tebe Chun of Shiver you start and Rosa. Oh, they didn't so dinner she. Somebody in the Tebada Samba Combas, Nambagi, didn't tell some cum songs and a chill looks on Chedande. Tell some and do so said targets over Mardo. Teba something to you, and I need to did something to you, Marwa. Tebe Chilla Samba Ase. So Samlutan Kingone Reda Marese, the Pendo Yubachi Reda Mare Samsa, Samlutan, or the which is so Shensona, some Jungi should have Sigurno, some Jungs outing with Neresha, some Tebe Chuna Shiban, you Tebe Dillian Dogwache, Tebe Tema Yamba Panse, or this year Sunani, then I shall Landur Chebayina, or that did Benekibuchung Regina, Mikiwa Chute. Sendina Kyochima Ralia never can get the red awesome. Oh, Tipang Bade, Sendila de Chimala de Redo Asamsa. Given the condition of Chatan de Koakive Curedosa, Chatan Pass on the Tarwa Togudoasam. Kibuchimbu Regina or Simjan Tamjak turned up Chukudo Ranchik with under Samlutana, Digmedo Samsa Samlukanga Corne, Dinashi Landurche would Esongora. Tibetilian dog was a Tibetima. Tibet young and Deba Tobas and a tar, Dungetam Jel and Deba young and Deba Tobas Sigris or yeah, this.
So here it is by hearing, by learning, that we are able to know the points of what it is we should take up into practice and what it is we should avoid. So these kind of three, this hearing, first hearing, and then contemplating that meaning, and then meditating on it. This is the way in which we proceed, develop wisdom within the context of Buddhist practice. So just hearing, that itself is not sufficient. We need to then contemplate, think for ourselves, is this correct? Is this right? Is this something that is beneficial, or is this not beneficial? And thereby we develop the kind of wisdom arising through contemplation, through our own kind of reflection. So again, as this verse says, by hearing one knows the Dharma. By hearing you turn away from that which is non-virtuous and abandon that which is not meaningful. By hearing you attain nirvana. So it is by this kind of hearing that we know what will harm us both now and in our future lives, what is going to bring about good results in the future. And going beyond that, the sort of small scope thinking, one thinks along the lines of a being of middling capacity, that it is attachment and aversion that will lead to further rebirth. Those are the kinds of things that should be abandoned if we want to gain liberation from samsara. And thinking beyond that, oh, well, it's not just me who is in this kind of samsaric situation, but I want to benefit all sentient beings that are likewise in this kind of situation. So again, it is through these kinds of stages, by having this sort of knowledge, that one is able to proceed in this way. If you don't have hearing, none of the rest of this can come about.
Oh yeah, this and you get some good. Sibe Songu Chuji Lam Nanny Kija Namla Dance. Siba Koage. Yes, on good to another, quiet to another. 어때서 참마탐 재판 매버서에 조직이 탑디 내 견줄에 땡여 송거와 도시한테들이 랑자된들이 시제바 시베송의 조직이 송왕 동의 조직이 남대 계절 땡여 송거와 시베송의 조직이 남게는 계절 남라 땡스 대신식과 덤바데 산제기 개에서로 왔다 산제기 제거에 가르스네 코라기 냠선용 무슨도 kenji 시랑가 냠요 연계데 견줄과 땡에 땡에래가 그래서 거라 집에서 뭐 조절문에는 계좌 남았다 대신식과 덤바데에서 상마 kengen게 산제기 깨버마부 에너지와 탑도 시르로 콤바전에 단도 타르신 bakem바데 다 견줄 땡에데 랑도르기네 친지 말로 바땡에데 대신식과 남게 당한 좀 믿음어서 랭게데에서 거라 대신식과 덤바데에서 당원에 주청게도 소소소게 터바제 삼배동을 삼루다 양내 양도 composition 소소 제고를 해서 거라 대신식과 덤바데 계산남지 자고서 어디질랍냐 야
So, as the Buddha has said, the path that cuts the sufferings of samsara, this is what I teach to you. So, again, the kind of path that eliminates the sufferings of samsara, that is what the Buddha teaches. The Buddha's activity is to teach to others what he himself realized based upon his own experience over a long period of time, over many eons of training in method and wisdom and bringing them to their perfection. The Buddha then teaches to others based upon that kind of understanding that he has gained. But again, the Buddha, his activity is to teach to others, but you, the individual, has to do for yourself. The Buddha is giving the kind of knowledge based upon his own experience. But again, the Buddha is not able to do it for us. We have to do for ourselves based upon what we hear.
근데 소소 냠스 말라나네 때 터바데야 단다 전부 연구 말도 근데 산제 송구도 가서래 내내 랍도 상부 최셔야스 라 내내 랍도 상부 최셔야 kö기 töne 양다 맞잖아스 내 신도 사회 최 랑도 친지 말로보다 결을 셔야 송거라 되셔줄 셔야 송거라 내내 랍도 상부 최셔야 kö기 töne 뒤제 결혼 속에 töne samlutane ane jile langdorchene susu nyamle machena sungora nene rabdu sangbe chöshege kögi töne yanda machenas tela longchene teba sambo kombachene peju chene kongo su teba samma mashaje langdo chegure sora nene rabdu sangbe kögi töne yanda machenas long machenas ora tele kineshe machenas kögi töne yanda machenas never mengi geba tawbata dag nene somenis never de bina min never subchimbushi naza subchimbushi nagibisha tako kale kene member yabuchi tengudu samchese member keba be yabushi bujira ne member de pe pe yabu tabu yabuchi ne de sotunge men de ten ro ta korango men de la ene men ko keba ka tobu ka ju chane kunyaje de modo masena ne ko pendo ke umare sungura dagne swami kabale sung oti de kasore men de soso sagore sura rabdo ne rabdo sambe choshe ye kyone yanda majena ne ba menji keba toba da dagne swami nishes member keba de sene statinal done uda member keba sen ko me ya buto zo ta ro tanda so ne no ma chena peng mare song do member maniere sti member ke mare mengi ke mare ro nga zo khashi de ro so chi chi ta keba ke ro ma do ke peng ma do se yora peng me de so ke nyamlim ma chen peng maro ke de so nyamsu mala za peng yo mardo so timbe ke mare mengi ke mare never kora ke mendi ya uma sesa ne trayo marwa membe mani mengi mani te never thinking never so da o te chi so ya
So here again, if we don't practice, the Buddha has taught this most excellent kind of Dharma, but if we don't practice it, then there's no way that we can actually benefit from it. So here, the Buddha himself has said that even though I teach this highest Dharma, this greatest kind of best Dharma, if you don't actually implement it or put it into practice, then there's no way that it will be beneficial. So the Buddha teaches without any kind of deception all of the points of what is to be adopted and what is to be abandoned. But if upon hearing this, we just sort of leave it at that, we don't actually implement it or take it up into practice, then there's no way that we can benefit from this. We have to actually put it into practice in order to get the kind of benefit from these teachings. So as the Buddha continues to explain, it's like if we don't practice the teachings that the Buddha has given, it's like someone who has an extreme kind of illness, who is very sick. And so they take a great deal of effort to find the most skilled kind of physician, the best sort of doctor. And the doctor tells them, okay, you need to take this medicine, you need to do this and this and this. And instead of actually doing any of those things, the patient just sort of takes the medicine and holds on to it. Then you're not going to get better. You're not going to heal from that illness. And so here, again, the Buddha is giving us all of the kind of medicine, the sort of most skilled and knowledgeable kind of doctor is giving us these instructions. But if we don't put them into practice, then there's no way that we can become better from this kind of disease. So if we don't benefit from the teachings, it's not the case like the patient that just sort of holds on to their medicine. It's not the fault of the doctor. It's not the fault of the medicine, but it's the fault of the patient themselves for not actually taking their medicine as they should. And so too, if we look at the Dharma and think like, oh, this doesn't actually work or it's not beneficial, it's really because we're not properly implementing it, not because something is wrong with the medicine.
Oh yeah. Oh, then yeah, Sanjay te songudwa. Wholesome kuyan dona lo songudwa. Oh, then garu songurasana. Teba janjan cheyade, teba de Puram ge Purshin yara, Puram sing sigudwa. Puram soya sing chimbuya gigudwa. Te pakba de shuche ne nalo de sana ngamu yara, pakba de ledo ngamu yomarwa. The chilo pakba de teba de chilo pakba de nashire songora. Samba da komba cheyade, komdi cheyade nalo ge Puram ngamu rongone te nashire songora. O ti indiko Tedan trawa rese. Tebe janjala mashaja, tebe den samba che yanda yanda soso lalil tane, nyamli che kure, ni shine rodi tsorgure chöge, chöge karsore, tenda soso li pemba ta, o kari yabate shine tsorgure songudwa, di lalsam kuyendo na songudwa, tene, puram shingshu nyingbu che ames, puram ge chilo pakba telia, tende ngarmu nyingbu ke yo marese, teba del songura, teba tsam telia, Puram shingshu nyingbu che ames. Ngawar chibe roni nangna dusa, ngamu ngone de nalo teba de pa ti chele komba che ne yandi hando, purshin nalo de ngamu de yore sukura. Ngawar chibe roni nangna dusa ura. Puram shingshu nyingbu che ame, kawar chibe roni nangna dusa. Ngamu kabu yongya ke ngamu rode nalo de yore. Kawar chibe roni nangna dusa ura. Shimba suibe mini, Puram rose, Shimba janjan go kodena, the nalog Puram rode, near Togumare Songora, Kumji Majana, Shimba Sube Mini, Puram ro, Shimbu Niba Nova Mayanose, or the Ragamares, Social Pendo de Umare. Chigo, Tatichan Al Pendo Chonso, Sosos and Joan Rashora, or the Rugumare Songora, Shimbu Niba Yomana. Chidare Shimba de Shimado, the Mawa, Sheba Nyamba de Shimba Nashin de Rese, Tambuti, Shimba de Gorba, Shimba de Nipashati, Nalo Dakar, Dota Nibati, Nalo de Dogorva, or Dil Machin and Dumaresore. Chidare Shimba de Shimawa de Roda Bonetella Tansim Yese, Roda Tella Tonda de Samlutan and Tina Shirang and Yamlechi de. And the Ronyo and I said, Esora. Roda Bonatella Tassim years old. Ne. Chidashimba de Shima, the Roda Bonatella Tassim years. The Davana Malaka Ponte, Ma Chibulaka, Tagat Simbachin, Mateas Gora, Malaka Pontes. And 다도 바위 제라 대솜시에서 다도 배 섭소 제네로 랑자카레 도착카레 야부 셴바티 나시 랑도 야부 제제소 섭소 제제 단다시리아 냠리 제들이야 답시체 우리 송구도 뒤질라나
So here in another sutra by the Buddha, I think it's called like a sort of encouraging one towards the special attitude, the superior attitude. In this sutra, again, the Buddha describes how important it is not just to have hearing, but to really take that into practice, actually implement that. So hearing, our learning from hearing is sort of like the skin, the peel on a sugar cane. So when we really want to taste that sweetness, the sweetness is really inside, and that's what comes when we engage in contemplation and meditation. That's where we get the sort of real flavor or the essence. So here this verse says that the sort of the peel of a sugar cane doesn't have that essence, that sweetness. That enjoyable flavor is inside. From just eating that peel, you're not going to find that desirable sugar cane kind of flavor. And so too, when it comes to our hearing, that's where we begin. But to really get that sweetness, the sort of essence of the Dharma, that comes through the kind of practice, engaging in what we have heard, actually implementing that, thinking about it, and putting it into practice. And so here, the desirable sort of sweetness is really inside. So we don't want to just stay on that level of the kind of peel where there's not really the true sweetness of that thing. So the Dharma will not be beneficial to us. We won't really get that real flavor if we just remain on this level of hearing about it and kind of being enthralled with the words, just talking about it, explaining it, and hearing it. But rather, we need to go beyond that. So here it continues by saying that getting rid of liking for just talking about things, one should always be careful or always have conscientiousness to think about the meaning, to really put that into practice. So here, again, we should get rid of the sort of liking just for the skin of the sugarcane. If we want to get to the real flavor of that, we need to have the kind of awareness, what it is that I should and shouldn't be doing, and put that into practice. That's how we're going to get the real taste of the Dharma, not just from hearing it alone.
Oh yeah. 어디인데 가서 우리 상관자 수수수 기부 충분이나 등이나 신부이나 비단 저 삽시 가져와도 시행하고 세울 때 소수 냠내 지야지도 시행을 하고 그러면도 강가 신기도 근데 기부 충분이나 용아 예수 믿고는 아니 샬라 세베르 수주르바 셴미기바 송게가 내가 가야 마치 송고라 샬라 팬토나 진이기 팬도치 내가 마치시데 디고 하모고지 게면도 나디네시 냠리잖아 뒤추신데 냠리잖아 레디오라 교치망에 손을 맞이 하다 밀기야게 레다다 싸겨라 나저디 춘주를 소리잖아 데토나시가 말아 디 니리 메세날이야 어머네 샬라 쳐와 주바티바 뉴그리 삼 샬라 쳐와잖아 뉴그리 삼 겨와다 트렌드 동해대 트렌드 그 삼을 거네 콜도부션 드마레사 야부 연구레 삼 란다치바레 삼 아니 룡아에 숨거든 니리 메시나리아고 샬라차와 판바트부치나 내성기 겨와가야 규디티 인삼 하다미 대와 표숨서부터야 규디 인삼 아니 미그 주봉기 치림송 심발라 소바다 셴다 겨와가 트ubtun데 트ub나 니리 메시나 주신도 트ub나 메시에다 그 심도 게레면도 디터바섬 다 샤샤네 마제네 이렇게 팽마르도 어디인데 그 터바짱로 마샤가 셔셔 가서래 소소냠리시 고래 송도 기체는 신의 로라 진이에 줘라 나 우추데 팬송섬 소소 메시나리아 요친 송섬 심리아 시딜렙송 섬사 소소 로드 뇽고야라 디메네 터제 요샤네 남균네 시제바고 남균네 시체네 나로 로게 뇽고요 마르게 팬도요 마로 어디 송도 어디인데 그 기부 충분히 되래. 대나시 기분 되는데 침불한 가지고 빠샤샤나 강가탄데 제노와 차단 맞이 성도라 라사서 소수 점점마도 섬유매게 가지고 콘조시 소수 철배 신자 숙심부체 가지고 콘조시 Chagdang nyuru pe zawa nede meba soto marde. O ti yabure mendoa samsa. Miri yinandra, chulu yinandra, kari ne lungba yinandra, chichona a ngazu chi kondu chi sewara ngazu sega chawar mata. Ngone ti rungu mare samsa samle nali shaagudwa. Chagdang nyuru danya dwa. Sosu luyu da ne da luyu da ba shinja shira shukchimbu chaya ke yo marta. O tini shenla tawa se. Chagdang nyuru danya. O ti kibu dringi chochana ko ti dwa. Kibu chimbu choyo nada tanda ngazu nyamle chaya dwa. Simje tamje dewa da te dunga. Simje tsama ngoshen ne chi simje tamje su simje tsama ngoshen tele pendo tu tinde che tu chi yo mardo. Sanje chang me ba chön sare ti ne simje kanga sang ke sa ro ta su kanga me. Te tu ye ke yo mardo. Na so so ngo ne simje imba sam. Simje imba sam dewa dole dunga me de simje imba sam samlo ta ne. O dele tu bu chön dreg mare yabu ko gre samsa samlo ko ra. Ti samlo cha ki de ne paru chil ko Simje yimba samgi kyusengi ko tunghe seya tanga dewa tomtogi samlo tanga bezu cheya kanka yungura keba machiga che. Simje kante chili chi tugare chungpa yina ki chikpa rangi chikpa chikyan niringi tanga keba mengere chungsa simje tamche seya tanda ti yungura. So teya nga zubi nyamli chena ko shitawa shindu machu na chenda wa. O ti indi ko o ta tiba ta chiksungna maa chato chesa. Individual.
So here, whether of the small, the middling, or the great capacity, we need to really, I mean, this Dharma is very vast and extensive, and we can't necessarily practice everything immediately, like know everything immediately or practice it. But we should make that kind of effort to whatever it is that we learn about, actually put it into practice on a daily basis. So like beginning with the being of small capacity, recognizing that everything that is harmful to others are actions that we should avoid, that we should get rid of, and try as much as we can to benefit others through our actions, to do those things that are beneficial and helpful to others. So this is something that if we know it, if we have this kind of knowledge, we can actually take it up and put it into practice. But if we don't, if we just sort of leave it at the level of knowledge, or like, okay, yeah, I know that, but we don't actually put it into practice, there's no way we can reap the benefits that come from this. However, if on a daily basis we make an effort to avoid any kind of actions that cause harm to others and do as much as we can to benefit them, to do actions that are beneficial and useful to others, then we can ensure that we gain a good rebirth as a human or a god. If we can have this sort of attitude that looks at every sentient being and thinks they're just like me, they don't want to suffer, they want to have happiness. And in that kind of knowledge, we actually avoid any kind of action that would cause suffering to others. That's the way that we are going to be able to achieve a good rebirth in the future. But we need to do this on a daily basis. We need to actually take that knowledge that we have and implement it, not just sort of like leave it at the level of knowing it, sort of like being stuck on the peel of the sugar cane. Instead, to really taste the flavor of the Dharma, it's about actually implementing that, doing that in our practice. So here, if we just sort of are like, oh, I know that, but then we continue to act in the way that we always do, there's no benefit. We're not really getting the essence of the Dharma. And so too, going beyond the being of small capacity, those beings of, we can put down imprints regarding the being of middling capacity and great capacity, recognizing the faults that come from attachment and aversion, from having the sense of I and mine and our side and their side. We can work to get rid of that kind of attachment and aversion, recognizing the way in which we grasp onto the sense of our, like whether it's our type of people, our religion. If we're able to see the faults in that, we can slowly reduce the kind of attachment and aversion that we feel. We can create the imprints to achieve liberation from samsara. This is based upon that kind of knowledge. We can actually implement that in our life. And going beyond to the Mahayana Dharma, the Dharma that we are trying to practice now, we can develop the kind of, based upon our knowledge, that all sentient beings have the desire to be happy and none of them wants to suffer. It's not as though we can go out and sort of introduce ourselves or get to know every single sentient being and free them individually, but based upon the kind of knowledge that by being a sentient being, no sentient being wants to suffer, and every sentient being wants to have happiness, and wishing in your own way to be able to work for the happiness of all sentient beings and reducing their suffering. We can, in our own way, develop this practice on a daily basis of actually implementing, taking up into practice the kind of actions that go along with that. So as much as we are able, we should try to do this, to really take up the essence of the Dharma, not just let it become mere words or sort of remain at the level of mere knowledge.
Oh yeah. Tanda ko so tanda che tobate kan che tobate tabshi che che bezu chenge chkudo taba koran shajum do samle shajum do niri mesenalia tebe tendelia so samlata o ti yane yandu ti tole kumdiche o tende che udo ene tanda che metobe samate maombalia tende che toba sho samsa membe yodu chene rimbi tende che toba chigi samsa 교환에 교육이 산지지 고반세도 다른 무게지 쉐요도 어디든가 마오반한테 체통계지 교화쇼 삼사 몰람자야다 마오반랑에 텐데 체토가 쇼 삼사 지기인 삼사 어딘데 삼을지 샤고요도 어디도 가서래 나던데 단단한저 테바장장 샴나 만디브레 소에티 와도 띵아라도 테서도 테베텐데 아니 samjungda kumjung salmadana pangborawa shenshingyo garje tandar tosi soso nyamyo chane chosile matuna pangborawa oti chane tebate chiloge pagbana shire nimbuke yo mare songo wardo majo teba chenge solya teba chebe tandate nyamsulane chiche ormado tene pangbore songo wara chidanko yang anju kashe tende ngudo chörechene konju teba janje chemado nyamli chig mare singesora tende shegdo ma katansa sora chigdo tene rabdu chumane teba che pechel teba che pechi janje tategine ko teba sagyora pisu ranche shira ko teba chene soso miki chubungi chudimina da ketsulumina da te tombade songchi te yora tende ko de kechimbuche nyamli chigyordo 어디 개천주 말와 개산지 템번 쟁게 열도 아주 템베 담주 남니 돼서 롱다 똑베 당니도 시도 롱기 템바다 똑베 템번이라 롱기 템번 쟁에서도 롱기 템바 소스파 셰야다 녀야다 아 템베 담주 남니도 롱다 똑베 당니도 등세제바 마치다 주바셰바 코나오송도 파셰 녀 챙이도 고요라 챙이 매는 생계 연구마는 생계 매는 지질 배에서 연구마도 더버 개심으로 참모탐지 더버는 신남사 자춘번에 시체 토구마로 참마 가 톱도디 지기야 더버시로 해야도 자고 더버디 지단 고산지 템번지 버려 백개심으로 생계기 셔야돼 백개심으로 산지 좀 된데 지된 감로 전에 송생계돼 교인들이 반내로 전에 섬수수 파셔야 될 개심보라 년계주 내야 될 개심보라 땜번 생겨라 땜번던 지역이어라 산지가 땜번던 지어라 산지 가르송도 전들송도 전들치송 디마지송도 삼 땜번던 지역이어라 어떻게 삼보르도 대 산지 땜번 생겨라 어디는 아주 터바만 뭐 제체도 터바디 제베 던다데 냠리치 마셔비샤나 아니 방보레 터바디 던다케 요 말했어 tindriche songo armado chida yan teba karsore kechimbu mai bada tindri somboda tan tebe phaye mambu songo do o de tembe tamje namni te longda to betangi do tinji cheba machida truba cheba khona o se o che shenge chigi che yabu teba che yamle chigi a chida yabu de sam sanje temban jengi ore sam teba chigi ore sam yabu de sam me shegi ore sam chigi kolo sigdo chöji kolose korse tandare da shaye mare chige nye susu nye kantudu nyamle che shendal paashe ya chige dikte tu che chöji kolose korea tandare mato susu janje she nyadene ni kotso dura temba pelgi mato chati keshembure oye tinde sonza da tanda sanje sonla teba che ti samba samlata yane ando kombala tene rangi kiwa chima wandu lami koban toba che. Lami koban toba za mayimba tendo kichi che gobe dongele tendo tawa chi chagwe sa. Tea rang chibu mayimba simche tamche pama gyube simche tamche dongele tawa chi che nebe sanje yu koban toba chagwe yinsam. Kyo kwe se yuende kundengi kansa chen gyuwa chagwe yinsam. Te chi do che nyenge yusam kulung se tawa nisambar shu sa.
So here, whatever it is that we have heard, we should try to implement, to actually put into practice on a daily basis, familiarize ourselves and get more experience with that, habituate ourselves to whatever practices we are able to implement on a daily basis from those things that we have heard, that we have learned. And those things that maybe we are not yet able to practice right now, we should hold on this level, in this level of aspiration, of thinking and making the kind of prayers and aspirations. May I be able to practice that in the future, holding them in that way, not as something that we won't do, but can't do right now, and kind of are putting in that level of aspiration. Because this is, again, a long-term kind of a goal. We're going to be striving birth after birth to be able to gain that state of Buddhahood. And so this is something where we need to think long-term. Again, here it is emphasizing that it's not suitable to really hold what we know, what we have learned as just hearing, but rather we need to contemplate it and then meditate on it. If we don't use what we have heard, actually implement that and put it into practice, then it kind of becomes a waste. We need to try to have an experience, to put those things into practice such that it elicits some kind of experience, that we taste that flavor of the Dharma. So here, again, when it comes to, when we talk about sort of the importance of hearing the Dharma, and there are those that hear the Dharma and they are holding on to the Buddha's teachings. Again, the Buddha's teachings, the Dharma, are encompassed of the nature of the scriptures and realizations. And so it is like those who, by explaining and then, or so by hearing and then explaining to others, they are passing on, they are holding on to the Buddha's teachings. But it's very important that we recognize that it's not just sort of holding on to the teachings on that level that is important, but it's also important to accomplish them, to actually put them into practice in order to gain those kinds of realizations. So while it is said that, again, we need to first hearing the teachings, that is something that is a very auspicious kind of occasion. Those that hear the teachings and then based upon that hearing explain that to others, that's how we continue the Buddha's teachings. That's how people are able to meet with the Buddha's teachings and they're able to flourish and continue and so forth. But here, again, while there are benefits to hearing the teachings, we don't want to just leave it at that level, but rather by holding on to the teachings through hearing them, we should then contemplate and then based upon that contemplation, meditate on that meaning and so forth. But it is through the explanation of the Dharma, by explaining it to another person, that we talk about the sort of wheel of the Dharma, where one is passing it on to another. And in that way, the kind of the teachings move along and continue. But we need to make sure that it doesn't just remain at that level, but we take the time to contemplate, to then implement those teachings that we have heard, such that based upon the teachings on virtue and non-virtue, we can strive to gain a good rebirth, and not just gain a good rebirth in the future, but to strive to gain liberation from this cycle of samsara, not just for ourselves, but for all mother and father sentient beings who are in this cycle of suffering. And so with that kind of contemplation, we should think, I want to strive to attain this state of Buddhahood, free from all faults, where I've developed all good qualities. And for this purpose, I'm going to not just listen to the Dharma, not just hear it, but actually try to put this into practice in order to strive toward that goal, in order to be able to benefit all sentient beings. So in that way, we should set our motivation for listening to the teachings.
Oh yeah. Oh, 당한 저 그스 될래서 tenju에 내시 뉴굴라 소벤 레비응어보 남 ng마와 남전 대바다를 타실라 속에 줄에 겨와 예바 마임베 라랑게 규용선 규르에 내급지 규인 띵이라 대부 델리착바라 Rowan Delhi Chabara, Luburu Sarjun do Shesin Badar in the Esigua. Tangwa Mount Toge, Jabicule Tenji on the Za, Noa, only Karsuda. Tagbachi Shire, Tagbajula Mambushagadua, Kutagbachi and Jura Manga Shiro. Yandi, Purangus to Ton de don't have China. Deshin de China, Ton de Kukin member, Yashandaji, Kulun, Samlatani, Kekuandava. Roa. And it two Tagwas Arab. Chishanda, Kuchi, Akigi or Samluti, Marison Gordon, Kadu, the Musum Ton de couldn't can Tenaka Kivina, or Tination Kigi or Ese. Kindi Konga Tozuka, Rawando Truba, Rangwini Trube, Kuchi Tse, and it makes a Kumendara Chiltenia, Kiwashigua. Oh, Tendeki Marese, Rawando Truba, Tende Kuchi and Telitani Kikomare, Tenjin Reverend Kujin Sobalatane, and it drebu the Kikures. So thank you, Ada, Mama Niti, Mendaka Resana, Mama Tozuka, Mabukora Kiwasidusa. Kiwasitu Mixegi, Rangune Kiwase, Rangan Suta Yongazi Kiwa, Kudan Kingi, Rangune Trube, Kudan Kinshigi, Ramadu Trube, Jebuti Suke Yonga, Shaji Samutangara. Thank you, Achana. Ramadu Trube, Kuayomara, Ramadu Trube, Jebu Yomardo. Kukanga, Kujin Sopanga Machilatan, Conjura Chansikigara, till Ramadu Trubachi Yomara. Good again, Debuki on the Ramado Drube Suki Omara, Kujin Son to the Kudan Kangason to do, Debukona Lubu to your turn, Geshe Ordo. Shut tension Reverjua. There's some Jeremato, Ramune Truba, the Tendekio Omaris. You know, do dinner, Yungi Vakas, Shisakasa. Cherum Bushange, Tendritebana Yungudua. Kandu Sunwe Chibanam, Tanzin Chawa Tenshabas. Kandu Sunwe Chiba. Shiribala Soba Mawala Soba Tezusungara, Mamatezoge, Mobatindu Mawatezoge, Kandu Sunwe Chibanam Tanzin Chawa Tanchiba, Kudan Kenlet and Kiaware Sedeco, Ramado Truba, Rangwine Truba, Tindajilit and Kiaware Seco, Tactade, Rangwine Truba, Rangshingi Truba, Zimbelo Deco, Temrutangiore, Kudan Kenlet and Kiam Gudua, Cora, Coratania Tangudo, Tenchung Genshi Warese. O tende samlutagara. Kasora. Ta tenju ata tezu chena. Kandu sunwe chiba namse. Ngoma to sungare chiba se. Kandu sunwe se kudan kenle tene ke honde rawando truba ta kumise mendachi rangune truba chi se tele tene ke yorese. Tende samlu ko yora. Kandu sunwe chiba na tanzin rawando truba zimba. Tanzimba ni yordan cheta da taktase. Takta de ya pelge yore. Kudan Kel Tani Kiba de Kusan de Generangone Yogore de Kujin Kiursigara. Shirubaga Sigore Timon Dote Batan Chidama Nangwaina, Semzamba de Tezoge, Shama Temba Drugure Segua. Kujin Shangiwanga in a Temba Drugashiki would say Laguata. So the Condusun and Shibanam Tanzin Shama Tanchiba. Tanzin Ramado Truba de Patemba, Temru Tangri Resera. Condusun Tanzin. Tinye Kela Truba, Trauma Luciba. Tinye Keba, Umatanjua Dabu Shabana, Kudan Kenlet and a K on the Kujin Sobe on the corner Ramaba, Debu Akivi or Madon Debu Ramwin Suki Omara. Kuran winning around 2 young sex and the Kiashi Omara. Count to Soya Chiva Nam Tanzi, Temba Truba, Ramado Truban Zimbin, but the Terra Tangara, Kudan Kenlet and a Kivares, Tendri. Umatanjua Alia. Conduson Chiban Tanzija Gentleman. Can you kill a Truba Trauma Lucheba? Keba Umaba Taba and a Kuda Kenlet and a key on the Rangwine Trube Mebate, Rangwine Trube Taxatifa, say Kulan Dugara. Can you kill a Truba Trauma Luchebacos? Ramado Trube Kakshe Truba, Ramado Truba, Rangwine Trube Trebatifa, Chebe Kulan Dugara. Yako samtan da pekaredoa. Mama to zoge, kuda kenle tene kigoa, konan pene kujin soni chutayon godoase, Tambadruba, Ramune Trubashi, Yoku, Rawando Trubashi go de Sigara. Thank you, I send attention to everyone Johnson that they may go with a stroke with her. Oh, Tijana. Tini Keller Trubai, Trauma Lucheka. Yeah.
No. So here, then picking up where we had left off in the text on the English on page 21, it says, unlike essentialists, consequentialists do not assert that all effects, sprouts, or anything else arise from causes such as the above mentioned four alternatives. Rather, they assert that an effect arises newly and suddenly from a stream of its specific ever-changing causes to which it is linked. So here above, we could see like essentialists, those that assert that there's some kind of a permanent cause, or that there's some kind of non-observable cause. Like if you have a harvest or something, the harvest comes about, but they would assert that there's like the sort of thinking, the intention of a divine being or something that leads to that coming about, or that there's some kind of permanent cause like time or something. So these essentialists, when we get into those that are within the Buddhist schools, they assert that there's some kind of cause that exists from its own side, that is existent in its own right, somehow autonomously existent or inherently existent, that gives rise to an effect that is of the same kind of nature. So consequentialists do not assert that, that any of these kinds of effects arise from such causes, but rather they assert that things are dependently originated, that an effect arises newly and suddenly from a stream of its specific ever-changing causes to which it is linked. So for the consequentialists, there's nothing that has a cause that is like existent from its own side, that somehow exists in its own right, is inherently existent, that gives rise to an effect that is inherently existent or autonomously existent from its own side. Rather, when all of the kinds of causes and conditions come together, then that particular result arises, that effect comes about adventitiously, newly and adventitiously based upon that. So here in J. Lama Tsongkhapa's praise to dependent origination, he describes this in a verse where he says, by grasping at it, the childish strengthen bondage to extreme views. So the childish here are referring to those kind of like essentialists who assert dependent origination in such a way that causes exist from their own side, exist inherently. And this strengthens their view of some kind of permanence, some kind of eternalism. So for example, even like the mind-only school asserts that the other power is truly existent or is existent from its own side. So their understanding of dependent origination actually causes them to strengthen their bondage to extreme views, in particular that extreme view of permanence. And so rather than being that which undermines that or gets rid of that grasping at inherent existence, it actually strengthens that. For the wise, though, this very fact is the doorway to cut free from the net of elaborations. But those who are skilled madhyamikas, when they assert a dependent origination, that actually eliminates any kind of existence from its own side, autonomous existence. So their way of thinking is very different. An essentialist, as it says here, this childish kind of being, by grasping at it, the childish strengthen bondage to extreme views. For the wise, this very fact is the doorway to cut free from the net of elaborations. So the same kind of understanding, not same understanding, but this idea of dependent origination, misunderstood by essentialists, actually it strengthens their bondage to extreme views. Whereas for those proper madhyamikas, that is the very thing that cuts the net of elaborations.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that and that go. Uma can you to the general. Tangbungo to do ne Kongo ne lutan chip figure. No Koran get not kilushora, and you musum to ton de Shisha Cheche. Tito and Koran Nedan Carreto, and you some Tanda Carreto Tita Viola. Trumgis on the Tambuchi and that is Titina Chichi Yangure some Carsoda. Musum to Madunga usually Yichi and Red Chevy Omare. 당보도 공무숨 그 교단 깨를 때는 깨단 길로 간다시 끼거도 내부 간다시 정거도 대 공무숨도 통돼야 돼 시샤체 고추서도 공무숨내 토구라 공무숨 그 토바 될 때는 아니 그냥 것이 따다 들을 때는 삼을다 다른 거는 주변에 공무숨도 주변에 여기서 거래셔라 공무숨 그 통양 거부치 고요래 그냥 아주 타르바투 야투 녀모 세바서 딱버리지 돈다원에 녀모 세베 셈데 두고요라 녀모 세베 셈데 뭐부치 두여요라 셈는 녀모 딱베 셈데야 두고요라 자 탑도 그 두제데 공어부치 네 여바치 무슨 두여 여바치 고요라 된도고 뭐베 내루 째야 돼 뭐뭐 코란 규진 무슨도 통돼야 뒤터내야 째고 그래서거라 될 때는 대다 소수 삼로 땅땅데 테마도 삼로 땅데 대다 냠도 소수 셈다 안 좋아돼 왜 남주 삼로 땅데 tunde 땅도 따데 레메도 안데 레도 왔음 셈다 삼로 땅땅 뭐고 봤다다 통다한테 자네 따고 알아 그래서 소수 셈기다 된다고 그래 야 대대치라나 된데 그래 아양 뭐 저저 때가 다들 소래 뭐더야
No, no. So here, particularly for the Prasangikas, the consequentialists, they really look at what we can see directly, how it is that things come into being, what is the nature of objects, of things. And it is based upon that kind of observation of the way that things are, that they come to present a kind of philosophy of that. Whereas it's not like some that might sort of put forth a story almost, or put forth like, oh, this is the way that things are, and then try to apply that to reality. But rather, the Prasangika, this kind of logic and reasoning really always comes back to direct perception. Although there are times when you use reasonings and put forth various logic and syllogisms and so forth, it really all goes back to establishing things with direct perceptions. So being able to like establish the mind that is freed from afflictions and so forth, we do so based upon our own direct observations. Establishing these various things is something that we do sort of in connection with observing the way that we normally think. So we can't do this outside of our sort of normal realm of thinking, but it needs to be connected with our own mind and the way that we think about things. And that's how we will actually create sort of change in our behavior and so forth. But this is something where the Prasangika method is really, it always sort of touches back to that direct perception and using logic and reasoning in order to establish the way that things are.
Oh yeah, 당아주 디말로션데. tenju ane nyugula sobe ngobo namsta tanda ngazo nyugula charne shege warate ngobo shenda kangal pa ring dene chikba samla tangura chi ngobo ina da nang ngobo ina da judan kel tene kedan kilude chibore de ordo tenju ane nyugula sobe rebi ngobo namse ngobo mawa namjende badar tashila sobe chule kewaran deba mayimbe ese dagi shanje niga gyumile kewate zu kelenge omar tezu kanga de Ramadu Trube Sene, Ramadu Truba Chiyokur Sam Sene, Kiletani Kebata, Kiletani Kebata, Ni Ramadu Truba Mani Kumebal Tene Kebara Sero, Tindishego no. Oh, Rarangi Yonson Juru Nang, but Tengu Achene, Rarangi Kudan Kento, Yonson Juru Negavlia, and it Kudan Drebu, Nielinda Lenges Kentesuke, Joer was a chedu, and Drebu Kona Lubu de Atayon Considerado. Ramadu Chene Ramune Tubechi Yomardo Negab Q Tinila Drelle Chagwas, Tedan Drelne Judan Candy than Drene Kever Mother Judan Candy Legacy Kitchunga de Shandachi Tagbata Chica can draw Mebaji Ted and get Kiashi Omare Judan King in Jures and Jurenegam the Kor Matochig Tagway Jushandachi was and it take on figure dash and Juaga Chimagun and Drebudine Kiashi Omarwa or Tipaka Yorda. Junti lan drel shakpate dan drel ne drebu ke korbato juda ke de sha paju ke chunge shanda she tinde takbata tinde kelinge homarto tenjuashane junti lan drel shakpara drebu lubur sarjon du she sem batarase jujin son de ko ke ma je su ke yo ma ko rame ba ke ngordo jujin ma son na ke ko sam na ke yo mardo o ti inde ngaran zo tawarba Mikasha Tende Yungtama, Yabuchi Yongu, some Rawashi, Chechi, dead, Madu Legamaja. Legamachani, Yabu, Kujin, the Tapsi Majane, Yoga Yomarwa. Tazi Yomarwa says, Judan Candy saw what I said, sent it to do in Edra. Tungen Dona Kanga say at Yukardo, Tewa in a titri at Yukardo. Judy Sana, Drebuko, Jusosana, Drama Legro. Jumasana, Yoga Yomarwa. Was a Jutu that she did tender Yungdo. Or Judy Lambra say Yabuchi Chuna something. When they say so, you trade Yabuchi China, Yabu Yonchira. China de Yabu Changura, this some Madache, Yabu Yona, some Mayona, some Samutati of the Chesa. Judy saw sudden Jebu Yunguris, and Jebu Yoma, some Dangumare. Judy Yabuchi Sash and any Yunguris. Oh, this you are not. And there is a Kodo Shes and Battery in this, Jubales, Uma Jubakas, consider Jumi Batans. Jumeba Mangadera, Champion Bacha, one juk is Julasada, one juk was Shiriba, one juk Chever said, saw dance, no one juk last of the Kasha Sangbe Chever said, or Kasha Titan the Share, soda. I guess a cute Tusu debut Tangi the year. Anthony, I turn Yachama to the power quarantine by Tim Drotin, there is some Langa. I get the Omare. Shanley Kiwadi Omar, on the Shangi said. Kasilang Bangaza, where Cabas Sunzi Medani or Judan Jushan and Debushan Kiwa Yomarese, Tondon Chebese, Jushan Melatin and Debutua Kiwa Yomarese, or Tendri Pachatachi or no. Non de Mare Rangwin to be Jushan and Debushan Kiwa Yomarese, Chitsonga Batazin Telechavno. Tashan Yigale, and Yigale Kiwa Mesha. Tashanikale Nicare Shusha Chuji. Oh, you there you said. Tashanikale Sera. When I'm Kiwan, you are my but is it any of the Kiwan Yosera? In the day. Did was consider to me, but I want you get Jula saw that Tashanikale. When I'm Kiwan, you are my but is it any of the Kiwan Yos? Just I want the Pukeva, Yanso Sunju Tos Meda Yungudoa. Taji, Shangi, Yigale Kiwa, Kumili Kiwa, Shina, Kiwa Kanga, Duvare Sunju Chivare. Tina Litandam Chevese, Tina Kiwa Meduta Kiwa Yomares, Chidan Kiwa Kashara. Chidan Kiwa Kashares. Oh, Chidan Kiwa Kane, man at Tomba Kona Comshan and Divarese, Tindi Sunju Chora. The Chesonga Waters and the Chidan Kiwa Kabat and Divu Marisongora. Only Karasa, Taji, Shangi, Yiga, Kumili Kiwashe. Tension Deborah Joy Kiwa dinner Sungua. Tashile Kiwa Mam Maimbe, teach it ten and rub the Kiwan Jose. Tension Deborah Joy Kiwa de Tashinal Shagmadua. Tashina Shana and the Taki my Shangi my Serva, Imajubala. Tata Shanla, Kanchi Kumi Badara, Kumi Bada, Kanchi Kumi Bada, one you get Jula so that Tashan Yigal and them Kiwan you are my teach it ten and rub the Kiwan Jusungua. Tashi Kiwale Shambe Kiwa Shagdua. Tension Deborah Joy Kiwati Umatenju Shade, Tashi Kiwan and Duyo Mare. Tashi Kiwadina Kanga Rangun to a Kel and Gesu Kiwa Shetan Tiroa. Tension Deborah Joy Kiwade, Tagi Amare, Shangi Amare, Kidus and Debu Kiwadi Yomarwa. Mambushas like Kudan King Son and Debuchiman Tangura Shegura. Kidus Yomaris Shegdua, Tagi Yomaris. Shangis the Ranguni to be Jushan and the Ranguni to be Debushan Kiwa Yomare. Koran Kudan King Sosan Lubur do have time Buddhas, Gemma Luburu Aremado, Ranwach and Sutemba Mares Shegdua. And the Kumeba Litanikia did it tell you, Mado. Kanji Kumibado, Kula Soda, Tashan Yagal, and when I'm given you a member. And the consideration that Tension Deborah Joy Kiwa Reson Gudua. Tension Deborah Joy Kiwa de Tashin and Madu Kiwa Shegdua. Says I did Tashinal Kanga Kane, Takiwa Yomaris, a couple Maris. Ramado to be Kiwa Ken and get a Zun de Yomaris, Takaris and the Kudan King Sobal attention derne, and the Debuti Lubu to Kigurese. Ramado Matube Kudan King and Debuti Kigur Mado, Ramado to be Kudan King and Kiwade, Tension Deborah Kiwalati Yungomare. good again, la tension, dennis, the Koratone, and the Lubur de Atengudwa. Rawaja Kawaya, Ramini to the Kamidwa. Shanda chooses to Ramame was a Lubur de Tengudwa. Oti Ducasora. But Namdi Kapso Yonguva. Teacher Medale to Nesiera. Tungawa Indese. Tungawa Indi. Medavase. Good again, you are going duration gets sonza. Rawa Tangi to Truba Yungumaris, Shigua. Teacher Medale Tungel and the Tamesos. Let the Yamu be Shawajan Medavasilia, Rawando Trubata, Galatani Trubeta, the Rawando Trubachi, Yomares, Sungua. Oh, God. Oh, when I go on, did you tend to have the go on? You share some, or did you love now? Oh, did you? Yeah.
So here, again, this uses the example of a rice seedling, a sprout, but this can be applied to any sort of outer and inner phenomena. So again, picking up on the text, unlike essentialists, consequentialists do not assert that all effects, like sprouts or anything else, any sort of inner and outer phenomena, arise from causes such as the above mentioned four alternatives. So here, again, they don't accept, consequentialists don't accept any sort of production that arises from a kind of cause that is autonomous or existent in its own right. So some sort of self-production or production from another that is like unconnected or not connected with that particular result, not from some kind of permanent cause. We'll get into the sort of alternatives, but rather they assert that an effect arises newly and suddenly from a stream of its specific ever-changing causes to which it is linked. So this is the kind of production that is asserted by consequentialists, that is the sort of coming about of a result from this ever-changing stream of specific causes to which they are linked. So when the causes and conditions come together, if we create the causes for something, then the result is going to come about, regardless of, say, whether we hope for it. So we can see, like, there are times where people maybe put a great deal of hope in something. They're like, oh, I really hope this comes about. But that's not really what's going to affect it. Rather, if you accumulate all of the causes and conditions, that's what will bring about a good result or bring about the result. Like, for example, there are some people who, when they have to take a test, they think about like, oh, I really want to do well on this test, and are kind of thinking about that. Whereas if they just studied well, if you accumulate the proper kind of causes, you're going to get the good result that you want. So here it is, again, based upon that accumulation of the particular causes and conditions that brings something about, not any of the kind of production from these four alternatives. So Chandrakirti then is quoted here. Chandrakirti states in his Entering the Middle Way, composite phenomena do not arise causelessly from a cause such as a divine creator or from both themselves and others. They arise dependently. So again, he eliminates the kind of causeless production, like that which is asserted by the Charvakas or the sort of hedonists, or some kind of divine creator, whether it's Ishvara or Brahma or whatever it may be, or some kind of cause like permanent time or a sort of general principle. Here, all of those kinds of alternatives are rejected. So any of the four alternatives. Now, again, there were some we saw earlier, like of those previous scholars in Tibet who thought that when refuting production from the four alternatives, one needs to apply the kind of qualifier ultimately. So there's ultimately no production from self, ultimately no production from another. But that's not the kind of understanding of Je Lama Tsongkhapa and his spiritual sons, but rather that these four alternatives are representing the kind of cause existing from its own side. So it is that sort of, there's no production from a self that exists from its own side or in its own right, or from another that has that kind of autonomous existence in its own right. Nor is there production from both of those, a self and other, or causelessly. So here there are those that would think then that this kind of, those four alternatives contain every potential kind of production. And so in refuting those four alternatives, alternatives. One is refuting production in general. However, that's not the way that it should be understood. As we see here in this quotation, that this kind of arising dependently, interdependent origination, that type of production doesn't fall into those four extremes. It's not in any of those four alternatives. As it says at the last line, they arise dependently. Composite phenomena don't come from any of those four alternatives, but rather they arise when the kind of causes and conditions come together for their production. So this is a kind of production that is outside of those four types. It's not self-production in the sense of something like existing in its own right that is able to give rise to itself, or existing from another that is somehow autonomous and existent in its own right. But rather, it is that things are dependently originated existence from their own side or in their own right. But rather it is by the bringing together of those particular causes and conditions, this kind of adventitious process, that we have results come about. So here in the Pramanavartika by Dharmakirti, there's an explanation of how because things are impermanent and therefore suffering, they also lack this kind of autonomous sort of self. So when we're talking about refuting production from the four alternatives, one should understand that it's production in the sense of the cause and effect existing in their own right, from their own side, having that kind of inherent existence. And dependent origination is a kind of production that is outside of any of those alternatives.
Oh yeah. That's it. Then they get she don't the bottom and share the so good and can't let any keep it and the share. Then the gen do much should come jelly come gang, then did the share. Chir then they get said. Uma thank you alone, the shema talk when the shell attend to share some my but that's all didn't to jail then the share. Diana should come jet then to share and the jet the much should come jet then to share with your then the she want to chit not then you want to chena. Then she but the right gauge good and then chip will attend the give a little good you are my rachera. Then she but the right gauge do jet and the shady rank good and can't then your share with no. That chit not then the shady then she but rank gauge a good chip will attend by my imbarchera. Rank chashes so Koraya came on the comparison of Koda gave one chick but not tall sober. Sabalas over Mambu Yorda. Oh, didn't it? She in a Pumbungala so what in the Dashi Mambu Yorda. Oh, Denishan don't have she now Cochasha Mambu Yorda. Could I get them but some my baranga chashe so Dashi dance or till chashe to the Dashi Sigora. Tataksa Shiru Chikorva. Dashi sober than Sem that so out and the Shilla sober dog Dashi Yorda. Oh, Kodan gave one so what is a kanga, Kangbe Dakshiri Yorda. Or Tina Shiko, Pumbadijin, Katan Shabdan Toada, Chitana, the Kanga, to some Dakshiri Yorda. Dakshidan, Doji, Tanya Tene, Doji Tanya Sidi, Tadi Ming de Da, and it did some sort of Loni Butilisgada, Try Tanya, the Loy Tanya's new Viva. Doji Tanya se. Todi chef du chugui dungeon never see yasun, that the Mingsi Tower or the Pumbasis Lapsardo, Pumbasla, or teach him at a course, Tambudajanga, the Pumbas Lagos and Pumbasla. It's a match of Pumbala, the Shandati Tons or Pumba Pumbase, Pumba Nyamba Loki, Pumbashiba, love the Tijan Condura, the Letanyese. Mobocona treat the men a carnage lapsha doesn't call Dada go to ye, so ta. Dici in the Mamares Kaga Kotovek, so Kotovek, Tradan Topan Utilisgora, Tradilisgora, and it is to give it over Tanya Tanyas. Tanya let them bada. Oh, Parisurita Buyas. Don't you Kangatavara, Kambaricina, Rang Chashel and Tavara, or Pumbaricini Chashel and Kansai Chashel and Tavara Esgora. Parisurita Buse, that Parisuris in a yanko, then did a chichil Tugara. Pachu Pajol then get the Nazu said that Suri Richiona, Sujo Risigra, Sujo read the Dange Pajo Ridela, Parisigra, so Tessali to the Parisuris, Parisi su tone parisi jituya medwa. Desa ju tone parisi tubu goda. Parisi da ringdung sede. Ringbu tongu sede dara. Chile de ko ringbu chagri chile de ko tong shandura. Chile tone ringdung chi ko ma do ko ringbu su tabari ringbu de chi wa ma do. Tongdu ine tabari tongdu si ma do shenda chile de suna ko ringbu chadura. Ringdung tabu dreme la ya penju temba yebe se. Parisi drawa ke wa marwa. Ringdung da chichung la sokwa da. Dada shen la sokwa tazun drawa ke mene ko chichile tene shakwe yore sungura. Sigara. Penju temba ye la se. Jung sheba yang se ten se de la. Judan ken le ten de komo go che takshi da. Ene yang dreme la ya chichile tene yore chere. Jung sheba de kyawa chikbu koko mare shera. Ane kare kure se na. Truba da lo yudu truba. Lo yudu jungwa. Lo yudu honwa. Tinti chacha kure. Honwa se drowa se kira. Odi lo yudu drowa. Lo yudu honwa se. Tinti li chacha. Truba la yang jukpe se. Tenchen debra jungwa chan jukpa yangbe wandu che na. Duchen duma che je chu tamje. Tenchen debra jungwa ino se. Dakshida doji la tenchen. Tetan drene truba shechire de warwa. O tenchen duchen duma che chu tamje. Rangi dakshida doji la tenchen drene truba res. Tele tente sigara. O teta yinba de tsashi. Ya te tsashi de long de transhan de gara. Tichir tenju mayimbe, kanshir tenju mayimbe, chunga yoba mayimba, tichir tongba mayimbe, chunga yoba mayino sondwa. Tenjin debara chunga mayimbe, dakshidang doji la tenjin debara chunga mayimbe, chunga yoba mayimba, tichir rangone trube tongba mayimbe, chunga yoba mayino sondwa. Oya, tiba chitana. Mungrucha satandi.
So here we turn to the section on the general meaning of dependent arising, because up until here we had talked primarily about the kind of dependent arising of composite phenomena. But here it's not just composite phenomena that are dependently arisen or dependently originated, but rather it applies to non-composite phenomena as well. So here it says consequentialists do not qualify only composite phenomena as dependently arisen. Rather, they describe all phenomena, composite and non-composite, as dependent arising. Non-composite things are phenomena are things like space in the sense of the lack of mere obstructive context. In this broad meaning of dependent arising, dependent does not only mean dependent on causes and conditions that give rise to the effects, but also dependent on a basis of imputation, its parts and so forth, and dependent on the conventional terms and concepts that are the tools of imputation. So here, when we are talking about dependent origination, it's not just the things arise from causes and conditions, but rather it refers to the process of designating on a basis of designation or basis of imputation. Like, for example, a house, this collection of walls and windows and a roof and so forth. On that basis, one can designate house, or the person being designated on the collection of the aggregates. So on the collection of parts of something, making that particular designation through term and concept. So here, like if you have a particular shaped clay thing, those accumulation of particles, one can designate the term pot, for example. And so when one puts the name on something, again, we have like a term, a name that we're designating with, and then there's the concept. So say when one first designates, oh, this is a pot, then once you have, say, shared that word with others, then you don't actually have to be in the presence of that particular kind of object. You say pot, and there's a mental concept that comes up of of what that term refers to. And so this is what we're referring to with the basis of imputation and the thing imputed on that. When you can understand that as being an individual thing, that thing which is imputed on a particular basis, it applies to all phenomena. Like a house is designated on a particular basis, a collection of parts. A person is designated on a particular collection of parts. And so all phenomena are dependently originated in that sense of being imputed upon a particular basis of imputation, a particular collection of parts. And so here, this understanding of dependent origination also refers to the mutual dependence of causally unconnected things, such as the near hill and the far hill, or short and long. So here we can have things that are sort of contingent upon one another, although not causally connected. Like when we are standing in one place and we say, oh, that's the far hill, well, that's dependent upon where we are and what is near to us. Or when we designate long and short, something isn't just inherently short, isn't inherently long, but rather it is in dependence, contingent upon something else. So we can posit one as being long or short. There's no sort of causal relation between the two, but there is this kind of mutual dependence. So the kind of word arising here, in terms of dependent arising or dependent origination, not only means production in the sense of coming from causes and conditions, but is also understood as existence or establishment. So therefore, from the viewpoint of this broader sense of the term dependent arising, consequentialists assert that all phenomena, composite and non-composite, are dependent arisings, in the sense that this broader sense encompasses all phenomena. It's not that things just arise or come about due to causes and conditions, but their establishment, their being an object of mind, is based upon this process of designating independence upon a particular basis of designation. So that kind of dependent arising, coming as an object of mind, can apply to composite and non-composite phenomena. So therefore, from his fundamental verses on the middle way, Nagarjuna says, since there is no phenomena that is not dependently arisen, there is no phenomena that is not empty. So here, this understanding of dependently originated or dependently arisen encompasses all phenomena. Therefore, all phenomena are empty.
Oh yeah. Tene tenjin debar juwase. Tenjin debar juwase ba rangi chashe so dakshi la tene tedan debar luidu trubam. Luidu hoa se chogare. Yu koran chane shebe na dakshi den drene luidu ndroa mado koran jangjan chi ndroa chi keyo marado. Luidu hoa se chogare. Luidu ndroa se. Lo koran gune shane dakshi la tene luidu hoa. Yuki ngune shana dakshi la tene luidu ndroa se ra. Luidu truba amu honshin ndroa da. Rangi dokje la tene truba ndroa la se. Dokje ki tanyen la tene tiwangi truba shaguyo da. Dakshi de la tene, ane dokje ki dechi chi res pa takba. Tetsam liya yudi yeba shagu res yora. Yana rangi chashe so dakshi ri. Nani kardo. Dakshi sunwa la tene se. Dakshi sunwa la tene, dokje ki takba la tene truba la ya. Jo rungo se. Rangi chashe so dakshi la tene, ane suwa. Dakshi la tene dokje ki tanye. Lodegi suran dokje ki tanye be lodegi pa. Titiri spa tagiri don. O de takba la tene truba tila ya. Tenshin trebali juwa sha chogre se. Dokje ki tanye la tene truba la ya. Jo rungo se. Tedar shingda tabu rangi chashe kolo so dakshir shene. Tokwe di shingda oshi tanye takba te samji shingda truba ta. Yebe chu sokba yebe se. Tatanda shingda tangima ine shingda pechane kolo chen raya de jindre pecharo. Tatensa ine kambuja ta namdu ta tezul chane tando manga kotere doa. Chala mambu shibichi yora. Namdu rashine tina chashet pe tongda mambu hijira. Laga shingi mambu yora. Tezul la tenje ine namdu sipa mingji tasaro. ente namla purdu namdu purke do ser tare tayena namdu sidi pagbare je tos no pe namdu reshas patagra nalo de namdu nagra o te namdu re ta namdu na te yo sam tagra tiena ko chilo ngaje pagbade to de nalo machine ji de ke tong yo mara sa tesole tene ha tagba samgi namdu tupsi chore tina lega chegede mangbo yora teso re lega chebede namdu lega cheben rogora chawa cheben rogora re ne namdu ke re de yo marodo dakshi chashe re ne namdu re yo mare teso mayinge je namdu yenge je ke yo mare taine teso kange lega chebede namdu lega chebe sha ku yora koran namdu mene te lega chebe namdu lega chebe sha go namdu dogu do se tege do se ya ja se ma de se to machine de che de yora sanko kanga chashe la tenje rel ne pa de namdu res pa ta gore ka tagen rigwa che gore namdu yimba so sare tanya de yusu tere dashi chashe jel tene de namdu res ming dang de namdu ming ta gore ani me kanga wa de namdu res ta tagen namdu tupsi so ar ma do tene ta ba cham tege ingen che che ge me do nalo chene namdu de res chashe re chene che yo mara chala tongda ka che na machine ka che na ina tesol tene ne pagbale tene ta kashe machine tene ta ne di namdu responding ta yora ta ba te sam di namdu tupsi so wara da di namdu reso resha namdu du ta du do asan do sha ma da ta namdu kar res dreso ta na jide ba mi di samba thanda me du sera samba thanda me ge sun cha tangye du yu de ta ga zo bare tene ta ba sam sha go re se de tire ti tangye du yu se tire 당해도 여봐서 지금 당해도 여봐서라 되게 침버져 당해 영하게 샤고선 도시게 도과게 샤샤질 때네 지금 용달의 명지 자사를 대왕게 봐 샤과 대성게 거의 유지 줘버려 침버져 버려 어딜에 대버지게 디가와요래서 제제니지 고마르 당해도 유지들에 마다 마셔버 유세야 되지 지금 당해도 유세 지금 당해를 제버져요 말해 당해서도 다 가들에서나네 그 선배탄다 megasulu 차라 tindu kasore tin jideng tanya de yusura ta rangwene troba yensana ta o tanya takwa samare namdu rangwene yoresana rangwe do ta tichen tanda ngaji chene namdu tene takwa samdu reswa chashe dang dojile tene takwa samdu shaswa ta tene takwa samare korangwene chawachi gechu yogo resana 다 지다 프로하다 대바다 자식들이 요라 자식이 남루든 디레세 제일 조조사게요 말아 랑원에 다 랑원에 요나 랑완도 요나 다 따도 째네 요 그래 째네 다 거기래서 디데 빡바르바 디 마신디로 디데로 다 남루원에 가르스나 오 디르다 세테시요나 네 랑원에 요서라 고랑원에 요서라 근데 조조사게요 말아 대sol에 때네 봐 따고 마도 랑원에 메도나 때네 따고 삼시고라 똑배 왕기 샤과세 당예게 왕기 샤과세 남도 이마인데 딱시질 때네 당예베 자단 똑배 봐 디치레시한테 다게 침버셔고라 다게 유주 좋아ren 지금 당예도 여수 예 마요수도 다가 타쳐고라 다 랑원에 연나 다 제네라고 그래 그 랑화도 두바치는 디마리아 디마레다 kawa do trubashi lega chenge namdu rawa de kawa yosan tinde nye medwa oda tina she cho tamjere sore ngarazu dan do chine susu sobu da semda sowa da do shi da tinde mambu do chashe tezole tene ani pa mige tashire te do res pata do susu ge nga chi yin sam ge do tesa ma da nga se namji nganzu samle na susu rawa de jiwa sam ge do sobu pasha sem pasha sowa pasha do shi pasha 단다 같이 요 삼사를 생기도 그래 랑원에 들어와서 고대에서나 차라 마부 여쳐 그래 지다 자 랑원도 들어봐 랑원에 들어봐 랑래 들어봐 나랑 그 요 삼사를 도와 어딜에 된담바 요봐 랑원에 요봐 뒤에는 다 제네라 그래 제네 다 가림 봐서디 내 가시게 신시기 남시들에서 가시 부부가가 들에서 가시 남시 말이 지나를 다딱 뭐 생기지 라와 샹다지 요래 딱지 라와 전지 다 요래 세라 right? Nambali ne chitamo pumbunga nane ngagari tayin said, right? And the consciousness marity sim the tayin said. Simzamboyina Kunshinam Shishingati is Shadaga Yi number ship was a Kyolan Dronganam Shishor Tita said to the Shadwa. Take you to the Tindisha Mare. Go teach you not a man, Richard.
No. So here, then continuing in the text, it says, thus the term dependent arising applies to all phenomena because all phenomena are dependent on their basis of imputation, their parts and so forth, and then are established as an object of the mind in relation to that basis of imputation and independence on imputing terms and concepts. So here, again, things are established by mind. They're established as an object of mind through this process of a mind designating through term and concept on a particular basis of designation. This is that. But there's no establishment from the side of the object in its own right. That mere designation encompasses the extent of existence of phenomena. So here, it continues by saying, in other words, it refers to phenomena being dependent on their parts and so forth, being apprehended as the basis of imputation, and then being established independence on imputation by terms and concepts. And this encompasses the extent of the existence of any sort of phenomena. There's not something that we can find beyond that kind of designation. So for instance, the establishment or existence of a carriage, of a chariot, is completed when you identify its parts on which are apprehended as the basis of imputation, and then conceptually impute to them the conventional designation carriage. Therefore, a carriage is established in dependence both on its parts and imputing terms and concepts. So, of course, I like to use this example of a carriage or a chariot, but we can use anything as an example, like a computer or an airplane. Like we think about an airplane, it's something that has all kinds of different parts. And we, say, we see the outside of a plane, we see something that is flying through the sky, and we designate, oh, that's an airplane. But if we were to try to search beyond that, to look for something within all of those thousands of parts that make up a plane and say, that is the plane, this really is it, there's nothing that we can find, nothing that we can point to. We can't find the plane in the individual parts. It's not like a plane exists in each of the individual parts, but based upon that collection of parts and designating, oh, that is an airplane, we can talk about an airplane flying, we can talk about riding on an airplane and so forth, and all of that, it encompasses the extent of the existence of that plane. So that suffices for its existence as being something that is merely dependently designated. We don't need to search beyond that for something that exists in its own right or exists from its own side. So here, again, when we are looking for something like an airplane, again, it's something that is merely designated on the basis of designation, all of these thousands of parts, and we designate something, oh, this is a plane, and we need to be satisfied with that. That is the extent of the existence of the plane. If we're to search instead for something that exists from its own side, that really is that airplane, that's existent in its own right, if that were the way the plane existed, we would have to be able to find it, but we can't find or can't point to anything beyond merely being designated by a term and concept that encompasses the existence of, say, a plane. So something this is really when we are looking for the type of conventional existence of phenomena, we're looking at a level where we're not analyzing and investigating. If one were to look within a particular basis of designation, within the particular parts, to try to find that thing that one could point to as really existing as that particular designated phenomena, then we can't actually find it. And so one needs to be satisfied, the level, the extent extent of existence of phenomena is that which is merely posited by thought. So if something had that kind of autonomous existence from its own side, we would have to find that thing that we could point to, that we could identify as really being the thing designated, but it doesn't exist. So our self is like this. On the basis of these aggregates, we designate a self, we designate a person, and we have this sense of there really is this autonomous, truly existent in its own right kind of self here on these aggregates. But when we look for that thing, look for this thing that exists ultimately or that exists extrinsically, exists in its own right, there's nothing that we can point to posit as being that self. Now, there are some schools that would say it's the sort of mental consciousness that is the self or is the person, or it's the collection of all five of the aggregates, or it's the continuum of the mental consciousness, or like the mind-only school posits a foundational consciousness as being the basis of that person. But really, according to the Prasangikas, the extent of the existence of the person is encompassed by it being merely designated by term and concept. There's nothing beyond that that can be found or posited to exist as the self.
Oh yeah, then this is lamna kashin long to talk. Then this is lamna ne chiksele sungudoa. Uma chikse kapsu sungudoa, dawa draba kira. Gender kirtiwa, this sungudoa, karasundusna. The way now lobby namji penji teba zambi kone truba number shawaja dose. Uma be lobby namjirwa. Dakshitan chashe tezola tezin jene. Löfa tagwa zamliya ko yeba shabiwares. Tanye de yuji sungwara. Lobby namji penji teba zambi. Truba number shawan zedose. Dini te konandar kelang urese. Tana shinjik dengi tanye de yuji tina shitene tagwa zamli shawar mado. Tatsene tina ne kadiresin diresi nye yeba shaya yomare sungwara. Dini te konandar kelang barshadese. Ye mayina ane kunzub regi mare. Tanye do yusudu taga zamli shaware. Kunzu do yusudu te zamli shaware se. Zene chi shasune te kunzu mare te tendam truba regi resu wara. Tena mayina kunzu teba dan temba mayi se. Zene chi shawina ane te tendam ba truba shawara. Tanye do yueba dan kunzu do yueba se te mata maje ba pa tene tagba te zamla pa shawa do zene nye dan tende yueba si shagi yuwa mare sungudwa. Techi lamna.
No. So here, from the master Chandrakirti's clear words, he explains that therefore the masters, the sort of Madhyamaka masters, present establishment or existence, present the sort of establishment of things as being merely established by way of mutual contingency or by interdependence. And this is what one should undoubtedly accept, just like that. So that which is conventionally or phenomenally existent is posited to exist without any kind of further investigation. This is the measure of conventional existence. If it were not like that, if there were some kind of existence that one could point to, that could identify as being really that thing beyond merely designated as such, then actually the conventional would not be tenable. It would not be tenable to posit that as conventionally existent. If upon searching you were able to find something, that thing would be ultimately existent. It would be sort of existent in its own right. So here, Chandrakirti is asserting that whatever is posited as establishment or existence is that which is merely mutually contingently established. That's what Madhyamaka masters know as existence.
Oh yeah. The Uma Juba Randrik of Sotan and Shungudwa. Number Cheva Chena and Kunzum Yamdur, Jidangi Tanya do you, Kunzu do you said in Yamdurwa. Concept Namdu Res, Namdu Kadres, Chagandona. I think Jidan Tanya Reguma, Tanya Yamdur, Kunzu do you say Yamdur. Madame Majeva some shower, or this Tawachashandra. Chagashana the chicken, but you came and do a china Tagasha, etc. The Mashani Jidan Ben Tanya Yamdure. Jenny Shava in a turn by Yovashar, Madon, Tanya to Yova, the Kunzu to Yovashawa, Remare Songdwa. Number Jeva Janani, Judem Betanya Yamban knew this. She Tanya do you to the Madame Majeva Koneshawa, Songdwa. Yeah, Tijilana.
So also from Chandrakirti's auto commentary to the entry to the middle way, he explains that if you investigate, when you're sort of looking at the conventions of the world, those things that are merely designated, if when you investigate there were to be something that could be found, then that if you posit something findable within those designations, then actually the conventions of the world degenerate. They're only conventional existence is only posited when one is not investigating and analyzing. If you are to posit that there is something findable when one searches, that actually would cause the kind of conventional to degenerate.
뭐야? 또 던던바 요나니 제제 요도 요고라 랑위네 요나 간사 고라 랑위네 요나 고랑 원네지 요나 현달의 뜻인 전에 샤모저 강가랑 요새는 뭐지 그 딱서버 제서버 지요나 딱 제제는 제버체는 라고로와 어디 요나니 던던바 요바스 거래셔라 이 우마시게벤 저번에 용도 나와 잡아 그러 주변 넘버 제바나 아니 옹보이네다 유이네다 간사이네다 수이네 랑ging 어디라고 말해 송거래 주변 넘버 제바나 유남리아 넘버 제바 가서라 유디라고 말해서 뭐 매베셔 팀 매버데 가 랑ging 뭐에 주변 매베쳐래 제바체니 피게 제가 치니 랑윈의 주변 누구담에도 랑윈의 주변 요네 카드레스 셀 제와이나 라고 말했을 때 매버다 랑윈의 매베ton다래 매베ton다 말해 예 마에세데 등이 탕했다 하는 마다 마제바 탕했다서 다가 여바샤 그래 단다 제니 치스네네 랑윈의 여바세 탄다래 송거라 걔들은 랑긴 뭐 주바 주나니 대세 태변 넘버 제보나 체세와라 랑긴 뭐 요나 태줍지 르베 제바ችን 카데레스 봐 제바체스네 세바체제 어디레 세제 라야시요 그래 송거라 이번에 미국 주와신테 미국 말에 대선자 랑신지 주면서 또다 제바체네 라야신 도나 대 랑신지여래 랑윈의 연에 제바체네 라야도 여고래 랑윈의 랑와도서 랑가랑 요서 그랑윈의 여바신네 다 카드 효과된 바신네 레레네 제네 라고래서거라 뉴턴담바요나 랑윈의 연에 랑신지여네 제네 라야도 여고래 때내 딱 봤으면 지금 당연히 요즘에 딱 제시는 요구 말해서 뒤에 개봐 당연히 요즘다 랑윈의 주변 요즘 가가서 그다 뒤에라나
So here again from Chandrakirti in his commentary to Aryadeva's 400 verses explains that if when you are investigating for the thing so designated, if you were to find something, if something were to exist in a way that it existed from its own side, existed in a way that it's able to sort of bear analysis, if that thing were ultimately existent, then it would have to be findable upon that kind of search within the basis of designation. So if you posit that there is something findable, then that thing would have to be ultimately existent from its own side, sort of able to bear analysis. And when you search for that thing that exists from its own side, that exists in its own right, or that has that kind of inherent existence, and you can't find that, that does not negate the sort of mere existence of something, but rather that is negating, you're not able to observe something that has that sort of existence from its own side. So here again, one needs to be clear about what it is that one is searching for in this kind of analysis. The sort of level of conventional existence, when one doesn't examine or analyze, is not undermined by searching for the thing that is ultimately existent. But when one doesn't find such a thing that is ultimately existent or existent from its own side, that means that it's only merely sort of conventionally existent. So here it's important to distinguish between the kind of existence from its own side. If you're analyzing and searching for that and don't find it, you don't actually negate the mere existence of that thing.
다 바체바 제수너와 Chubaradigas, number Cheba Chena, Jideme Tanya di Yamdu, Rag Mares, Raes, Yo Mares, Tanya, Chigetum Dole Sugda, Dolung Tangdua. Perna Sing the Gula Tension is Tamye Sura, Tamye di Retanya Sungdua, Singji or Entelia Tarn Resistance Ora, Sing the Gula Tension, they say. Then the Tang Sigdua. When I sing the Gula Tension as Sugda. Singji Gora, and it is Tarch Gora, the Tambo member, Lulu member, Abuchi Gora, Tata Gora, Lulu Janet, Tata Maret, Tamdan the Chedura. When I sing the Dole, when I sing the Gula tension as 10 as order, and then Lagwacha, and then Lagwa Josh or sing the Q Koran Chipu Digmara, Q to the Tar del Sigara, the Cuba del Sigara. Sing the Gula and Lagba and Lagwa Gatration Bacora. Yabuchi caption it, Trajambu Yungura Kamashin it, Yambu Marwa, Lagwache, Lagwajanja Dumane, some Gitsoaches or did in the show some Jota, Kujimambu Sanguda, some Lutangore, Lagwe Kujoja, where Shing the Abucore, Tarde Abucore, and a Tamias and Yambuto Acere. Shing the Gula tension and Lagwa Zoache was some sona, and a Troji Pianlimbula Sole, and a Troji Tato Watchebe. You are Tamieda to the Lingburistana, Kana Limbutana Yora, Direction Zubutin, Direction the Ayungredo, or Trochi, Pian Limbula Sole. Tada Lene, try and join you, and a Tanyambo, Yabuyungurishara. That the Tarasha or a Tanyambu dos Tarasha Zor mother, that Tade Kane Yungudos, Taja Chegadon, the Ragmarisera. Then Keba Lale Taja is all Keba Kajati Kade Yungdo. You said this, Jagusana. There's a tender so well than younger madam, the name is still Zuzu Sakera Mardo. Then a Keba Lale Taja and Esse, then a Kane order, Kavandro Rese, Chodan Chonsam Namso Tajana, ne try one drawing me, and try the Kane Yors, Dene Yonshas, say your mother, Drosa de Yes, the Kavandro and Drosa tank your mother. Then they saw some the Lubur to Yungor, Lubur to Melachar, oh, teach them and do that.
So here then, from Chandrakirti's auto commentary to the entry to the middle way, he says again, if one investigates, if you try to investigate the conventional with this kind of reasoned analysis, then those conventions of the world degenerate. You can't actually find the thing. So for example, it gives a quote then from the sutras where it says, for example, in dependence upon the wood and the strings and the effort of a hand, these three coming together, you have something like a noisemaker, like a piwang, a violin, or sort of like a little guitar or a flute. And from the arising of from those three things coming together, you have this kind of sound that comes about. So again, when you have like an instrument like a piwang or a little guitar sort of thing, you need to have the wood and the strings. And again, all of this has to be set up right. There are many causes and conditions. You can't just have them be really sort of too loose to not have any tension. You can't have it be too tight. And then one needs to have not just the sort of instrument with the wood and the strings, but also the effort of the hand. And the effort of our hand, the sort of skill of the hand, comes from a mental intention, saying like, oh, I'm going to pluck these strings. And so there are all of these causes and conditions. When those come together, you can have noise come forth from an instrument like a piwang or like a flute. Again, that might have different causes and conditions, but you know, the blowing of a flute. And so from the aggregation of those causes, you have the sound come about. But there's nothing that you can point to beyond like saying, oh, there's a beautiful sound. If you were to try to look like searching for, well, where is that sound? Where does it come from? Where does it go? This quote from the sutra continues by saying that if someone sort of skilled started to investigate to try to see, well, where does that sound come from? Where does it go? Looking in all directions and all sort of intermediate directions, they can't actually find the coming or going of the sound. And so the existence of the sound that comes forth from that instrument is a mere designation. When you try to search for that thing, it sort of dissipates. You can't actually find it. So the conventional, again, exists at this level of being unanalyzed, unexamined. But if you were to search for something deeper, it's like trying to look for, well, where is the sound coming from a guitar? Where does it come from? Where does it go?
Oh, yeah. Don't do it, Oh, yeah, that's good. Oh, the Darishing that was stashing that Namdula Sova Karina, Computer Sov Karina to Chibarwa. Rangi Chashe, Kolola Sova, Dashiri Chede, Toben dishing the washi, Tawasam dishing the Trubaresera. Yeve Chutsova Res, Tesam, Tanya do you Chutsova. Rangi Chashe, and Dojila Turnishing the Truba Yinoche. Deshin dose, Chukanga Chibura. Hejin Lamdo draw at Tabu, Dan Lamdo draw asana. Lamgal and Rugi Narwa, and Mansudain Kangorina, Kurjusu, Lamgal Rugiora, Lamdo draw us at the Kavares, sending Yako, Lamdo Drudos, one Drudos, Tagacha, Ta countries Drudo, draw the Lamgati Yorbe, any Kangbal Yorbe, Consatil Yorbe, Jogwadil Yorbe, and she sent Segomar, tended so Kulundache, Lamgata, Utansa, it was then Kujora Captain Russia Yora. They shower mother that say that such a thing can marisera. Say lam the draw can is lamla yorda, Kansa de Yorda, Kangbal Yorda, Kangbaya de Yorda, Masha, Tindisana, Rawa to Trubachiona, Tindishiyokura. Muzu such a tau serbachiona. Regret taxation and tau serba. Rawa. Che serba, Chebachin, Cheba certum getchiona, the resera. Taxu Chebachin Ragmaduna tau mesuba, Che mesubara. Takje jene yo mare, cheba jene yo mare se, disi wara. Ranga chashe dan doji le tene shingda, druba yin no se. O tane shi lejin lamdun roa, tati chikbar shire. Lejin lamdun roa la lamdan komban deng jo dan, lejin kansa so le tene, lejin lamdun roa shi, takba tsamji lejin lamdun roa, rugdo sin taga zora, o rugdo shasha or mata. Takshi dan doji la, tene drubar jokba le shendo, Teaching Rawashi, Lamdo Droabo did draw this Rawashi, Royo Marisha. Getting draw Rawashi, Yonata, Legend de Reda, Compendenjo de Reda, Lamla Yorda, Cavayos, Raya Yomarise, or Tination is on Gudaya. Teach election. Do that.
So here, then again, like whatever kind of object we want to use, whether it's a carriage or a computer or a plane or whatever, when we talk about any of these, the establishment or existence of a carriage is completed when you identify its parts, which are apprehended as the basis of imputation, and then conceptually impute them to impute to them the conventional designation carriage. Therefore, a carriage is established in dependence on both on its parts and on imputing terms and concepts. And that really encompasses the entire extent of the carriage's existence. And so this is true for all phenomena, any kind of phenomenon, like taking the example of Devadatta walking on the road. With respect to the example of the Buddha's cousin Devadatta walking on the road, his walking is established by merely imputing Devadatta is walking on the road. Independence on Devadatta, the road, the lifting up and placing down of his feet, and so on. So when we, like if we're an old person, say, walking along the road, and you've got like your cane and you're pushing and lifting up your feet and setting them back down, if you want to try to find, well, what is the going? What is the action of walking there? Well, does it exist in the road? Is it existent in the sort of lifting up and setting down of the feet? Is it existent in the person, in the movements? There's nothing that you can find and point to as being that is the walking, the act of walking. There's nothing that exists from its own side, like autonomously, independently, that is able to bear scrutiny, to withstand analysis, that we can point to and say, this is the walking. But rather, it is something that is merely dependent upon these various causes and conditions, as well as the act of imputing that on a particular basis of designation. So here, other than this establishment of Devadatta's walking in dependence on the basis of imputation and the imputing terms and concepts, where is there an independent action of Devadatta walking? There isn't. So if you were to search, if there were such an independent action of walking, then its ontological status would not be encompassed by merely imputing Devadatta is walking on the road. It would necessarily exist in its own right. But here, there's nothing that can be found found that exists in that way, other than something being merely designated on its basis of designation.
Oh yeah, that dangerous. Oh, that and then Rawadi Rawachiyana, and Zeni Niakuris order. The Shimini Seven Rawdins in Nikovale. Then Lamland draw your down, Cumberland draw your down, Consadil and Redan Cardes and Ragamaris. This our Shire Copso, and then draw Tapas pick up some Gopa check do out in a shire. Oh, this round this one.
No. So here again, if there were some kind of independent activity of walking or independent action of walking, then there would have to be something that could be found within the basis of designation, within the various actions, the road and so forth. But there isn't anything that can be found. So here, this is refuted as well by Nagarjuna in his fundamental verses on the middle way, where he goes through this, looking at if there is something that could sort of exist as that thing that could bear scrutiny, it should be able to be found. But other than something that is merely designated on a particular basis, we can't speak of any other sort of existence of that act of walking. So in this manner, the fundamental verses on the middle way refutes this findability after it analyzes whether this walking exists in the road, in the movement of the feet, and so on.
Oh yeah, that is awesome.
So we'll stop there for today as time is up.
We'll finish with some dedication prayers. May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it, have long life. May I pass by completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of wholesome teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Idam Guru Mandalakam Niyatayami. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. So thank you again, Rinpoche, for such precious teachings and inspiring motivations as well. And Katrina, thank you for your clear interpretations. And we'll see everyone here online next week for teachings.